People don't understand what they take for granted until they get into a situation where they're locked in a little box.
Paul Hildwin spent 28 years on death row for a crime that DNA evidence suggests he did not commit. After 35 years behind bars and 3 bouts with cancer, he walked out of a Florida prison and into a new world.
I mean, just feeling the grass under my feet, you know, that alone, I mean, it just felt so good. I mean, after walking around on concrete for 35 years.
As the country was going into lockdown in March, Hildwin started his life as a free man.
Eating real, what I call real food, compared to prison food and jail food. I had my first Publix sub the day I went to the beach. And I thought I was in heaven. It tasted so good.
Now his plans are on hold as the country fights to contain the coronavirus.
There was like 4 or 5 goals that I had to set for myself to take care of as soon as I got out. Get an ID, get a replacement Social Security card, apply for SSI because medically I'm disabled, open a bank account, you know, but I can't do none of that. And health insurance, I can't do none of this because everything is closed.
A jury in Hernando County, Florida, sentenced Hildwin to death in 1986 for the murder of Ronsetti Cox.
The victim is found nude and badly decomposed in the trunk of her car.
Hildwin testified at trial that he stole the victim's checkbook from her car while she was fighting with her boyfriend. He said he fled the scene during the argument.
Their theory was he needed money. He went to steal her check, gets caught, then tries to rape her, strangles her to death, stuffs her in the car, cashes her check, has some property of hers at his house that they find.
The jury never heard from the victim's nephew, who said he was with her during the alleged time of death. The state's case rested largely on expert testimony about bodily fluids found in the victim's car.
You know, the implication to the jury is it's Mr. Hildwin's semen on the victim's panties that are found in her car.
Hildwin's death sentence was reversed in 1995 due to poor representation in the penalty phase. Then, with the help of the Innocence Project, the murder conviction was overturned in 2014 by new DNA evidence.
Once they were DNA tested, guess what? It wasn't Mr. Hildwin's semen on there. It wasn't his semen. In fact, it was the boyfriend's semen, who is who the defense was trying to pin the murder on.
His case made headlines when Hernando County prosecutors said they would retry him. But instead of taking chances at another trial, Hildwin pleaded no contest to second-degree murder. In exchange, he was sentenced to time served and lifetime probation. And why would an innocent person plead guilty to murder?
35 years. I was exhausted. I was tired. You know, I was just spent emotionally, physically, mentally, and the no contest deal was the best option for me.
Why would you take a risk of going to trial, not knowing what a jury's going to do, and potentially stay in prison for the rest of your life? You've already been in there 35 years. It really is a no-brainer.
There is Leanne Gowdy. You may have recognized her. She tried a case on Court TV earlier this year, and it was a hung jury. Amazing attorney. So I could see how all this happened. Let's bring in Chanley Painter. Chanley, let's start here, though. So the prosecution still believes, and I guess they have to believe if they wanted him to take that plea, that he committed this murder, despite the fact that the DNA that at one point they thought implicated him now implicates someone else?
That's correct, yes. So he was actually, the Supreme Court of Florida overturned his conviction back in 2014, and he still remained behind bars because the prosecution was set on retrying him. And seeking the death penalty again. They said they had enough other circumstantial evidence that they could make their case prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he was the murderer of Roncetti Cox. And they point to other evidence, such as an alleged confession to his cellmate that he was the murderer, as well as where the car that she was found in was located was in a direct line to his house, that stolen items from her car were in his house. And of course, back in 1985, it was serology. They didn't have DNA testing at that time. And the prosecutor said even without that, now pointing to her boyfriend, they could still make their case.
Huh. There's a difference between making your case and getting to the truth. And the problem I have with that is if that was his semen, they would say that's the evidence. That's a smoking gun. We got the right guy. And when it's not his, well, it doesn't really matter. See, I call prosecutors on that all the time. I want to listen to more of Leanne Gowdy on this one because she's such a brilliant attorney here talking about, I guess it was the death penalty being overthrown and the overturn of the conviction.
Well, in this case, not only was this guy inexperienced, the defense lawyer, and he didn't really know what he was doing, but then to boot, the state was riding roughshod over him and the trial. When they got to trial, the opening statement, the state brings up something about this item of evidence. It was a pair of panties. And they say that the jury's going to hear that these panties were found and that they had semen on them, and that the FBI laboratory made serological findings on that. And what ultimately they do is they present to the jury that the semen is found is of a certain blood type. Mr. Hildwin's of a certain blood type, plus the semen was left by what's called a non-secretor. Mr. Hildwin is a non-secretor. Only 11% of the population are non-secretors, and therefore, the implication to the jury is it's Mr. Hildwin's semen on the victim's panties that are found in her car.
Chanley, that makes me so angry because prosecutors have to seek the truth. You have to seek the truth. And if you are, and we see them, I mean, DNA evidence, right? They argued that the DNA was one of the reasons why this guy was guilty. Well, now we know, right? It's not his DNA.
No, it's her ex-boyfriend. Well, her boyfriend at the time, she lived with William Haverty, whose DNA it was at the time. And Paul Hildwin testified during the trial that he hitched a ride with the victim and her boyfriend. They started fighting and arguing. That's when he decided to steal her checkbook and leave. And so her boyfriend was there, according to Paul Hildwin, when he left. And there was other evidence too, Vinny. The Supreme Court, when they actually overturned his conviction, not only pointed to the, discrediting the serologists and the science that they used in 1986, but also pointed to post-conviction evidence. The nephew of the victim, it was later found out that he said that he was with her 12 hours after the prosecution said that Paul Hildwin actually murdered her. So again, not just DNA, but other evidence too that pointed to his right to a retrial.
Yeah. Prosecutor's job is the truth. Justice is the truth. Justice doesn't always mean convicting the first person that you arrest. Unbelievable. Chanley Painter, thank you so much. I know we've got more with your interview with Paul Hildwin later on in the program.